Hello everyone and welcome to this latest video discussion as part of the RICS Tech Partner Programme. My name is Andrew Knight and I work in the knowledge and practice part of the organisation looking at the effect of data and technology right across the built and natural environment. And I'm joined also this afternoon by my colleague Anil. Perhaps you'd like to introduce yourself as well, Anil.
Thank you very much, Andrew. My name is Anil Sawhney. I also work in the Knowledge and Practice Directorate of RICS. I look after the knowledge and practice for the construction and infrastructure sector. I'm also a fellow of the RICS and look forward to our discussion today.
Thanks, Anil. And we're very pleased to have Morgan Hayes join us from Alice Technologies today. So you're very welcome, Morgan. I think you're dialing in from Boston. I think Anil's in DC and I'm in London. So we're doing a reasonable spread of time zones today. So great to have you on the call, Morgan. And I guess I suppose it's turbocharged a lot of the kind of discussion about AI in general recently. But this whole kind of generative AI is obviously getting a lot of attention at the moment with the rise of products like ChatGPT and Google Bard. From your perspective, what does it mean when you apply generative AI to the discipline of construction scheduling? What does it mean from your perspective?
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, I'm excited to be here with both of you this morning. And as you mentioned, I'm with Alice Technologies, and my role is Senior Vice President of Product at the company. I'm responsible for product and design. So that means that I bring new products to the market, improve our existing products, as well as ensure that they meet our usability expectations and our customers' usability expectations and needs. So great to be here. As far as how generative AI impacts construction scheduling and what Alice does there, we believe that this is a brand new way of scheduling. The industry's been building master schedules in fundamentally the same way for 35 years or so. And this is not an incremental improvement upon the curve. We believe that generative AI and Alice represents a step function in the process to develop a master schedule that is delivering on the cost and time, as well as risk mitigation needs of general contractors.
So I think that sort of connects very well with the next question, Morgan, we had. As you know, schedule certainty, cost certainty has been a very important aspect of our industry, and the discussions on time and cost overruns sometimes make us as a sector a bit challenged in terms of delivering on those dimensions, even though we deliver some excellent projects globally. So the next question is, why do you think scheduling, if you can go in a bit more detail, is particularly a good area of construction lifecycle to apply broadly AI and more particularly the generative algorithms?
Yeah, so generative AI is great at pulling together disparate data sets and generating meaning out of them. And that is exactly what happens today in the schedule creation process. So we just completed a really exciting round of market research at Alice. We've talked to 51 industry experts from all the segments in our industry and all over the world. And one of the things that's very clear is in the schedule creation process, there's this massive combination of fragnets and templates, and then there is a layer that typically is added over top of that by a scheduler to ultimately generate that master schedule. And generative AI is great at pulling together meaning from those balkanized data sets and then serving it in a way that allows a scheduler to add value over top of it by filling in gaps, ensuring that there's an alignment between the scope of the owner/client's expectations and the actual material that's going into the schedule from prior schedules. But that's not enough, and so that's why the Alice solution is beyond just pulling together these disparate data sets. So what we do is, and this is what I talked about when I mentioned the step function, is by parameterizing the constraints in the schedule, we're enabling this massive new world of options to unfold in front of our scheduling colleagues. What happens if you change some of your core equipment constraint assumptions? What happens if you change some of your crew utilization constraints? What sort of different paths from a sequencing and resource allocation perspective open up to you? So it's not generative AI and Alice in particular do two things really, really well. Pull together data sets that are spread throughout the organization, enable you to add a layer of value from a human perspective on top of them, and then by parameterizing them, open up this brand new world of options around how to build that were just never available because they weren't, it wasn't feasible to explore all those options in the time allotted for a schedule creation.
So I guess in that sense, Morgan, you've used a phrase at Alice. I think this phrase construction optioneering, and I guess that is, as you say, the ability to look at numbers of options that just a human being couldn't really consume or create. Is that really a good way of describing what that optioneering means?
Yes, that's right. And so going back to our research that just concluded, the typical process that we're seeing, particularly in the commercial and the infrastructure segments of our industry, is that the way that a master schedule is created is that there's a scheduler and field personnel, a PM or a super, and that field personnel will review the owner's expectations or the bid materials that have been won, and they will say, hey, look, this is the nth hospital that I built. I understand the sequencing that I want. I know where my resources are going to get allocated. And that particular method may be a perfectly fine one, but it's fundamentally a function of that individual's experience, or at best, perhaps the organization's experience if they're very mature. And what optioneering really means is that you as an organization can go beyond your organization's experience or your individual field personnel's experience to figure out the right construction strategy to use on this particular project. So by parameterizing all of the constraints in the project, we enable many different approaches to be discussed and considered by the pre-construction team or the bid team. And that creates a lot more flexibility around how to manage risk. It creates a lot more insight into different approaches that you would never have gotten before. So that's what optioneering means to us.
Thanks, Morgan.
I used to teach construction scheduling, so I used to teach a method called the yellow sticky approach, which was essentially a collaborative way of doing scheduling. So you could bring a group of folks together from various trades, disciplines, have a big white shiny wall in front of you, everyone given yellow stickies. You will put your activities on the wall and juggle, and then we have traditional methods of doing scheduling. We've all seen CPM per PDMs all our life, I guess. So what's new and different and better in your approach And how do you still bring that collaborative piece or collaborative planning into the mix?
Yeah, so I'm very familiar with the yellow sticky approach. We addressed that issue in a past life when I was at Autodesk. So I understand what you're referring to, Anil. Um, there's a couple of different things. Like first, Alice is a master schedule creation tool. Um, we're not focused on being a look ahead planning tool or a pole planning replacement. There are lots of wonderful solutions in the market around that. We do support schedule management and maintenance within the construction phase of a project, but we do that through a couple of different means. It's like one, we're going to give you a lot more options. Like for example, we have customers that want to get a project back to green. So they will say, "Gosh, this project is headed down the wrong path. How do I fix it?" For them, they want a broad perspective, not just a 3-week or say a 1-week look ahead. They want to see, okay, you know what, we've got this milestone 2 quarters from now, like how do we get back to that? What's the path? And we enable that capability. So by tying the schedule to our constraints engine and enabling a complete perspective for the rest of the project on the different options that are available to the customer. So it's a little bit longer term, and it's a parameterized approach that gives a lot more flexibility.
Thanks, Morgan. I mean, it's become a cliche, obviously, now to talk about the potential effect on jobs and roles in terms of AI and whether that will take away jobs, not just in construction, but broadly across the built environment and other sectors. What's your view on that kind of perhaps doomsday view that AI will replace people? What do you think will be the kind of blend of tasks that AI is best suited to people are best suited to? And I guess, in my opinion, that the positive idea of people working together with AI and that kind of augmentation to people's roles.
Yeah, Alice's implementation of AI is not targeted at eliminating roles. It's about enhancing insight and improving decision making so that you have that ultimately schedulers, field leaders, heads of operations have the insight they need in order to address the project either in a pre-con phase or during build in the way that they want. So we're actually, I think, enabling a lot more insight, a lot more flexibility, a lot more consistency within the enterprise. So we don't see, like, either with the current product or with future products that we're considering, a replacement per se. It's much more around like insight and acceleration.
So it talked about working at the organizational level, helping organizations and enterprises look more carefully to options, better risk management. So what kinds of companies do you serve, and how is Alice useful to them?
Yeah, that's a great question, Anil. So we serve general contractors, subcontractors, consultants. We serve customers around the world in APAC, continental Europe, in the UK, in the US. In terms of the life cycles that we support, We actually support all three phases, bid, pre-con, and build. And we have clients actively using us in all three phases right now. So we have a ton of flexibility in the way that customers can apply our AI based product. They can do this to generate different options for them to use to bid on a particular project. We use it. All right, hey, I've won the bid. I need to get my master schedule built for pre-con, or as I mentioned to you, like getting back to green during the build phase. So we also, for consultants, they use us to give more insight into their customers' experience, or their options.
And in terms of the kind of mix of, general contractors or asset owners, project sponsors, what's that mix, and do the use cases differ for the different audiences in terms of how they're using Alice?
Yeah, definitely. So we do support commercial, infrastructure, and industrial clients, and there's a couple of different vectors, Andrew, that they vary on. There's like, one is the level of detail. Some of our customers really want to model the project in a ton of different ways, and so it's about setting up the problem. Some of our customers need to get a relatively high level heading on which path they should head down, and other customers use it in a traditional, like, let's create the master schedule for our project in pre-con, and so that we can continue to execute. What's been fascinating to see is that, like, in different segments, there's different levels of continuity. So in some segments, what we see is like the schedule that is submitted with bid gets tossed out if they win and rebuild completely. In other segments, the master schedule is kind of evolved over time. There's like a higher level schedule that went in with the winning bid, and that as the engineering process unfolds, the more detailed schedule gets built out in conjunction with that. So there's a lot of variability actually in the leverage that schedules have within our industry, and generally we see fairly decent consistency between this like commercial and infrastructure spaces, as like for how heavily used the first master schedule is, and then in industrial it's a very different animal, and there's a series of like fairly distinct steps between pre-feed, feed, and detailed engineering. So it's commercial and infrastructure are relatively similar, and then industrial seems to be very distinct.
So from the description that you're providing, is it fair to say that the technology probably doesn't apply to small projects? So the question really is, how large are the projects on which companies use Alice Technologies tool? And just sort of out of curiosity, have you considered using?
Yeah, most of our customers. Most of our customers are using us for very large projects, 9 figures and above. We do have customers that are using us for smaller deals. I think the value proposition is related to the level of risk and insight needed. So the complexity that we see for smaller value projects is generally lower. And as a result, they have more insight and less risk as a result, and less need for exploration of different options. So the relationship between risk and between complexity and value is relatively there, and that drives the attractiveness of applying Alice, for sure.
Have you seen it being used maybe for forensic or delay analysis?
No. I mean, if you're talking about like claims consultancies and doing Windows analyses or like a true forensics for litigation purposes, no, I'm not familiar with that. We certainly could it certainly be used for it? Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we have an enormous amount of detail when it comes to the model, the digitized means and methods, the schedule that it created, when that schedule was created. We have the ability to track changes to that, so it's definitely usable for it. But I'm not personally familiar with our use in that space.
I suppose leading on from that, Morgan, I suppose it'd be interesting to almost step back from the use cases we've been talking about and get your views on other areas of construction where you think AI can be applied if it's not already being used.
Yeah, like generally the applicability of AI to construction. I mean, I've been impressed by a number of the players in the space that are doing AI-based progress updating. So I think there's a lot of engines out there where they've got tools that are trying to walk the site, make updates, and you're using computer vision and a number of other technologies to make a determination. Okay, like this is the progress on my concrete scope. This is the progress on my HVAC scope, and it's accelerating and improving the progress updating process that schedulers and field personnel do, on a regular basis. So I've been impressed with that. I think that it has the ability to provide data in a faster timeline than what it typically has, and with more insight. So I'm watching that space pretty closely.
So Morgan, probably you get this question on most of your interviews and podcasts, the mindset question. I'm going to throw that at you. By introducing this new approach to construction, you're asking construction professionals to do things differently. Scheduling being, as we discussed, a very traditional area. The first thing you do in a job trailer perhaps is look at the schedule, develop further, and so on. So what kind of resistance to change have you faced? And are there strategies for an enterprise to overcome these mindset issues or these blockers?
Yeah, I think that, I don't know if the resistance to change that we encounter is a result of AI per se. It's more of a function of this is a new way to do things. And the level of resistance is directly related to the pain associated with not having the insight into the different options that they have. So, like, for example, someone who's super specialized in a particular type of build, and this is all they do, like maybe they're a specialist in data centers or hospitals. Like, well, we built many of these before, and we know exactly the different traps to avoid, and so getting them to switch and say, like, all right, hey, there's different options to this, is harder than I think someone who has more variability in their projects and more sophistication in their projects. So those two vectors definitely influence it. It also has to do with the level of incentives. So like the schedule is really just driving that cost and duration piece. So are those incentives aligned? Like if you're not doing self-perform, then how much incentive do you have to really drive down that cost, drive down that duration? It varies. It really does. And so I think there's like an openness to experimenting with AI, and so I don't see any resistance to change as being a function of that per se. It's really more like, hey, how much will this new workflow and new tool generate for my business? And in that sense, it's the same as it has been for any, new software or new approach that's come around, at any time.
Very interesting.
Indeed. Now, like Alice, RICS is a global professional body. Both Anil and I interact with both tech partners and other, firms and operators in the construction sector. So we're always interested to hear around adoption from a kind of regional world perspective. We're about to release another iteration of a report that Anil and I do on digitization more generally in construction. So it'd be interesting to hear your perspective of how you're seeing different paces of adoption around the world with your clients.
We're seeing great adoption in Europe. And a big factor in that is the difference in the use of BIM.
Yeah.
Like BIM is an important element in our product, and there's just a lot more use of BIM as the centerpiece of a lot of workflows within projects in Europe. Sometimes there's regulatory advantages or like tailwinds that we have, like the UK. So BIM is definitely a factor in the adoption of this. The other factor in adoption is how much, like, is there a R&D or innovation function? Like, okay, we're gonna bring in this new workflow, and we're gonna experiment with it. That's definitely a factor for us. I haven't seen too much of a regional difference for that, Andrew. But yeah, BIM is definitely a factor that drives great adoption in Europe.
Morgan, my question next one is relating to maybe more specific example of any work you're doing in the UK. But before that, I wanted to see if you could expand on the connection between BIM and Alice Technologies. How does that, is this a dynamic link both ways, or how does that help the scheduling process?
Yeah, so how the way that Alice works today, Neil, is that we combine two core inputs. One is the BIM model, and two is means and methods. So we digitize an organization's means and methods, and we call that digitization recipes. And so we tie those recipes to elements in the model, and we enable and we combine that with what we call supports. So we understand, okay, here's the hard logic. Obviously, the first floor has got to be built before the second floor. The foundation's got to be built before the first floor. So we use a combination of the model, the recipes, and the supports to physically generate an actual schedule. So instead, like the schedule in the past, in processing in the past, would have been like, all right, well, we've always done it this way, so we're going to do it this way. But by combining the model with a set of like, oh, okay, I take steps 1 through N to install a window, and hand that to the solver. The solver is like able to say, okay, well, I have many different paths that I can use to actually physically construct this 4D experience, and those different paths get visualized in our UI, and users are able to say, okay, like that's a really interesting combination of approaches. Like, I'd like to explore that schedule. And then they see a Gantt view that allows them to actually like review the outputs of that. So BIM is the central input to us to enable the flexibility that we need to generate the different options that we have.
Any specific examples in the UK?
Yeah, so we work with Align JV and we're working on that's Align JV is part of the HS2 project, which is a very exciting project in UK. We're specifically working on the Colne Valley Viaduct there. It's been a really incredible experience to see how Alice has really given them dramatically more insight into different ways that they can be building the Colne Valley project. So we have a number of other customers, both in the UK and in Europe generally, which we'll be announcing very shortly.
Great, thanks. Well, I guess a final question, I think, which once again kind of steps back a bit from perhaps the specifics of Alice and the things you've explained so well to us, because I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on, AI does seem to be in its early days in the construction industry to some extent. So, if you get your crystal ball out, Morgan, what do you see about the long-term view about how AI could impact the industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a bunch of there's a couple of different ways that we can go. One is I do think that the updating process for progress can change. I think that we are going to continue to accelerate the master schedule generation and updating process. As far as tying together the whole industry, like there's not a ton of what I would call like lessons learned applied out of past projects that are actually brought forward into new projects, and that's because the data is embedded deep within either the BIM model or the master schedule, and or the invoices, like the earned value management data sets, and it's very, very difficult to get that data out and actually make it actionable and applicable. So I could see AI being a factor in changing that, changing like how much learning ultimately customers can get from their prior experience.
And do you almost see that as a virtuous circle where the use of AI and its need for data would drive the sector perhaps to think more differently about how it retains and curates its data and how it makes it accessible, as you say, in that kind of lessons learned piece?
Yeah, I think that's already happening, Andrew. Like I've talked to multiple customers and prospects recently who are installing data management regimes that include standards around data quality, data access. I talked to one customer who was interested in actually having blobs of data that they could mix and match across a bunch of different workflows. So this idea that we have all these silos, like, hey, I've got all my RFIs in this silo, and submittals here, and maybe I've got all my plan drawings here, and then I've got models over here, and they've got a lot of workflows that drive from that. I think that there's going to be an opportunity for them to pull out that data and make sense of it, because right now we're still in a very early phase as an industry. It's like we're just trying to like get our data into one place. And I think AI is going to accelerate the process of actually creating a value-added layer over top of that. So I'm excited about that.
And I suppose as a final comment, do you almost think you mentioned earlier about how the use of BIM was a driver for you? Could you see almost the reverse being true, that actually the use of AI and the potential of AI would drive more BIM adoption because people would realize the value of having that BIM model from an early stage?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think that we have still a cost problem and a skill problem when it comes to the adoption of BIM. A lot of projects don't have BIM because they just don't want to incur the cost associated with it. So I don't know. I mean, I think it could help, but until you adopt the skills, like a broader skill set, around VDC, and you have more accessibility to high quality models at a lower cost point, I think those two factors will be like a massive like holdback to widespread adoption of BIM.
Well, that's interesting to hear, and I don't know about you, Anil, but a really fascinating conversation. And Morgan, thanks so much, very much for your time, and look forward to talking to you again, no doubt, in the future. Thanks both.
Thank you, Morgan. I think thanks to you and your team for this session.
It's been wonderful to talk to both of you. I really appreciate the time, and I look forward to being in touch.
Pleasure.